Welcome to the MTA International USA Studios in Silver Spring, Maryland. Today we'll be talking about pre and post 9/11 and how Islam is interpreted in America. We have a great panel here today. Starting on my right is Imam Hamad Ahmed, who is located in Baltimore, Maryland, and with the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, who loves hockey, as well as formerly from Canada. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Next, we have Amjad Khan, who is the Director of Public Relations for the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community USA, as well as a practicing lawyer in Los Angeles, California. Recent father of a new daughter who is less than 2 months old.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
And on the end, we have Imam Azhar Hanif, who is the National Vice President of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community and currently lives in Philadelphia, graduate of Brown, and known to be a basketball player in his day and perhaps today as well. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. Amjad, break it down for us. What happened? 9/11 was a pivotal moment in America's history, but it also provided some context on what people thought of Islam before and after that. But let's go before 9/11 first. Provide some context for us. What was the world like for Muslims in America pre that act on September 11, 2001?
Well, Muslims have been in America for a lengthy amount of time, for centuries really, but before 9/11, which was a watershed moment in U.S. history, there was a certain understanding, I'm talking about the general American public, there was a level of understanding of Islam that was quite low. There's a lot of ignorance that existed about who Muslims were. They were this other, this foreign view. Some people had a more sophisticated understanding of Islam, but by and large, the average American didn't know much about Islam. They knew about the Quran, they knew about certain verses, they knew about certain practices of Muslims, but they didn't understand how Islam was a global faith and how it connected with world events. So no one really read the Quran. It wasn't something that was deeply understood by the average American. Politically, pre 9/11, we were enmeshed in a war against the Taliban in Afghanistan. The immediate events before 9/11 was trying to account for the Taliban and those who were opposed to the Taliban. So there was, under the Clinton administration, this pursuit to try to deal with this problem that originated in the mid-90s. And there was a view that Islam, in Afghanistan at least, had very extreme practices, stoning of people in public settings, and so, but nevertheless, there was never this overt sense of attack on Islamic faith in America pre 9/11. At least, as someone growing up in America, I could not tell that. Yeah.
Imam Hanif, take us there. What happened on September 11th, and in context of Islam as well?
What happened on 9/11, I think, is quite well known to the world. That a group of individuals who were bent upon committing a terrorist act to draw attention toward their group, their cause, and let's say their overall objective, which was to drive Western influence out of all of Muslim lands, particularly those influences in Saudi Arabia, in Palestine, and as you mentioned, in Afghanistan and other Muslim nations, and to send a signal to the Western world that we are here to defend ourselves and to commit havoc in your nations, so-called in the name of Islam. Taking it one step further, actually on 9/12 is when you see a tremendous difference in the American public. Because on 9/12 there was this great intense curiosity, what happened, who were they, and why did they do this? If it's based on religion, then what is this religion of Islam? And that lets you know they didn't know much about the religion, because they had asked the question, what is the religion of Islam? Go back just a few years earlier when a building was blown up in Oklahoma City. By then, what we got to know the culprit was an American, European, white American, Christian. There was no questions asked about who is this man's religion, Christianity. Because we had enough history in our country to know that he didn't represent the faith of Christianity in his act.
But that's a little unfair in the sense that these individuals who committed 9/11 were doing it for their faith, whereas some of these they happen to be Christians and whatnot.
That is the understanding which we as Muslims have. But I'm talking with John and Jane Q. Public.
Okay.
they have no real understanding of Islam. I grew up here. I mean, in this nation, when I grew up, there were no mosques. There were very few people who were prominent in their eyes in terms of Muslim leaders. The ones who were, they were always just fringe elements, negative. The Ayatollahs, the Yasser Arafats, Anwar Sadat of Egypt. But again, very few people were connected with that kind of experience overseas. It didn't affect us as Americans.
So Islam, the first introduction of Islam to 300 million Americans is Muslims hate us and they want to kill us. Is that a fair representation? First real introduction of Islam, Imam Ahmad?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you look at it from their perspective, when you know nothing of Islam and these people claiming to be Muslims, screaming the name Allahu Akbar, and they're attacking our buildings, your buildings, they're killing people, you can't blame them for believing Islam as a violent religion. Can you really blame them for that perspective? It's not their fault that the perspective they've been given is a distorted perspective. The exposure they have of Muslims is of that minority group who do these things.
How do you take the interpretation that these Muslims believe they've been wronged so much for so long by Western atrocities? Look what they're doing in Palestine. Look what they've done in Iraq. Millions have been killed. So therefore, it's a war. Civilians have been killed there, so therefore it's just and fair, even according to Islamic laws, for them to attack American soil and do what's been done on their land. If that was their position, it sounds somewhat reasonable.
Well, it's certainly, for an American Muslim and for many American Muslims, it was very unreasonable. In fact, we felt like our faith was hijacked. In as much as they hijacked those planes, they hijacked our faith. Why? Because for the first time, as we've talked about the worst possible introduction of Islam, for the first time they've now reinitiated in their ways this kind of new and perverted view that we are now in this perpetual state, a new state of war, and the only way we can defend against Western interests is to actually infiltrate their country and kill innocent civilians. It's redefining the laws of war that exist truly in Islam. It's a perverted interpretation, a militant interpretation, and they're justifying their acts because in the name of protecting those who are oppressed. Now, for American Muslims who love their faith and love their country, we look at that view. I looked at that view and I said, how dare you? How dare you take my faith and muddy it and pervert it to such an extent and then say that is the Islam that exists?
Tell me how they justify using your faith to do that.
So
not take me in the head of literally of those 20 individuals, but that philosophy, the Osama bin Laden philosophy. How did he use Islam to justify that behavior?
So it really comes from this Wahhabist view, this particular view of a rigid fundamental interpretation of certain selectively chosen verses of the Quran to justify what he believes to be a continuing state of war, Darul Harb, and to get to the state of peace, Darul Aman, they need to use these means. These are desperate measures, but these are desperate times, and all the oppression that has been endured by all the Muslims, we will take that cause. And we will protect you. How? By imparting a lesson to the West that you cannot defame our faith. And we are justified to use aggressive means because we think we're actually defending the faith. So it's this interesting view that we can use aggression in self-defense of Islam.
Sounds
preemption.
So that sounds reasonable to a certain extent, doesn't it?
If your worldview is one that might is right, and this is the way to achieve your ends, then most nations have been adopting these kind of policies. It's not just this particular group. Mm-hmm. You use aggressive means to promote your ideology, to span your borders, to conquer surrounding nations. This has never been, however, the position of Islam, which has always talked about the rights of others, the inclusion, the peaceful engagement with all people, etc. What I find most striking about it is, if you're going to look at some cause and effect that Americans should realize, this is our own history. Our own history tells us that we were engaged in warfare prior to 9/11 that fueled some of these groups being trained, being funded, and being given the green light to go and fight for America. This was the same Taliban group in Afghanistan pushing back the Russians. Now what happens when that war was over? Where did they go? Where did Osama bin Laden, all those foreign fighters who flooded into Afghanistan to fight for the interest of USA, where did they go? They went right back home, and they found out a new war has broken out. A war between Iraq and Kuwait, and the U.S. government put boots, American soldiers on the grounds in their homeland, in Saudi Arabia. That incensed them to an extent, feeding into this false narrative, we're under attack. And so now we have to fight back, and the same forces now gather together and fight them there, and then fight them on their own soil. So this is where the American public has not known the historic roots of some of this whole dynamic.
So how were these groups I mean, it wasn't a bunch of 20 individuals who had tickets and who just thought of this. There must have been a support. So there are some Muslims who believe, enough Muslims, I would say, who believe in this ideology to be able to fund it to make this happen. And we can fast forward to today as well, but let's stay there for a second, who had funded this apparatus to be able to do this. So there's enough Muslims who actually agree with this ideology out there. What is the counter ideology?
The counter ideology is that Islam, though it may appear to be under threat by Western influence, the greater threat was within the Islamic world itself, out of a lack of unity and a lack of spirituality. This was prophesied by the messenger Muhammad himself, that that day would come when you would be unable to manage any outside threat. And so it would constantly lead to warfare. It would lead to disorder. It would lead to those people who are supposed to be the spiritual leaders, him declaring to be the worst people on the face of the earth. And now we see these so-called spiritual leaders are the ones fueling all of this, this rhetoric toward fight, 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 kill, suicide bombing, all these things. And yet they themselves stay behind. And so the very idea of what happened within Islam, it plays out on both sides. We see the disease, and they get the unfortunate affected by this disease.
So Imam Ahmad, tell me the Ahmadiyya Muslim community's view on this. I mean, first, do they categorically reject it? Do they disagree? Tell me the Ahmadiyya Muslim community's position on these individuals and the way they've been described and their position.
We say Islam literally means peace. The fundamentals of Islam are peace. Even the most extreme version of Islam stretches towards peace. These people are perversions of Islam. They are people completely outside the religion of Islam. They are people who have taken these specific verses and teachings completely out of context, where they have no relation to Islam whatsoever.
What saved us, just one point why I'm mentioning this, what saved us was right after 9/11, the then President George Bush stood in front of the nation and said, our fight is not against Islam. That stopped a wave of anti-Islamic fervor that was building in this nation. I mean, the first man that was killed was a Sikh because he had a turban on. He wasn't even a Muslim. But it was generating, because of the ignorance and because of the fear factor of this group coming in, it was starting to create a wave, a backlash after 9/11 against anyone and everyone that looked like this group that claimed to be Muslims.
So tell me, how did the right kind of Muslims, or the true Muslims, or Muslims, not perversions of Islam, how did they have a leg to stand on? There were lots of so-called Muslim leaders in America who spoke out against 9/11, but yet when you saw some of their speeches before 9/11, they were agreeing with that philosophy or that ideology. Can you share a little bit about how did Ahmadiyya Muslim community say anything before 9/11 against this, or was it after 9/11 that quote-unquote bandwagon of, yeah, that's not right?
Yeah, well, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community had a very authentic voice, because for a century prior to 9/11, the DNA of our community is to fight the scourge of extremism. The founder of our community, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, his mission was to end religious war, to stop this perpetual bloodshed in the name of jihad. He wrote a book called British Government and Jihad. Living under British rule, he said it is wrong to use this concept to wage an aggressive war, a holy war. And he called out all the Muslims who did. He unsettled conventional Muslim thinking at the time, and for that belief, he was branded a heretic. He was attacked. and there was an intellectual war that was happening in the 19th century. Christians were attacking Muslims because of this behavior, and he said, this is not Islam. Now, fast forward 100 years later, I felt, as a leader of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, I was just a law student. I was about a few miles from the site of those terrorist attacks when that plane, that United aircraft, was hijacked, a week into law school. And I remember being very proud of the fact that I can say, look, I believe in the Messiah, who came for the purpose of attacking people like representatives of Al-Qaeda who are doing these acts. And so what we did was we educated people about the true Islam, not by using politically correct verbiage like a lot of other Muslims leaders did, but saying we've always believed this. Look at our record on this. And those Muslims who actually had some sympathies with some of the Wahhabist view, they actually did an about face, and they said, you know, this is not the real jihad. And so you got some very convenient rhetoric coming out of some Muslim circles in America claiming to be for peace, but when you look at their record, they were actually fueling a lot of these ideas.
Interesting. So, Imam Hanif, you're young enough you were we'll leave it at that. you were a practicing imam in 2001.
Yes.
Tell me about 9/12 and going forward. What did you do? What was the feeling about Islam, and how did you share the message of Islam to non-Muslims?
9/11 was a strange day. We had just acquired a property in the state of Pennsylvania to start a mosque there. So it was a church which we had acquired, and we turned it into a mosque. And this was maybe about a month before 9/11 happened. I just moved in with my family. I'm settling there. I'm turning on the television, and someone calls me up and says, "Look at the television." And I'm watching these scenes, and my first impression was, I don't know what's going on here. You know, I'm not thinking this is an attack of a terrorist group who are Muslims. But then the news starts to trickle out that indeed this is what took place. So the people, like I say, around began this anti-Muslim backlash. Because we had positioned ourselves in that neighborhood for the first time, people didn't get a sense that this was a mosque, but I reached out to the community. I let them know that, look, we are Muslims here. We want to answer the questions which naturally are arising in your mind. Call us in. We're ready to come and have this dialogue with you so you understand clearly what our president was saying, what others are saying, what our history speaks, what our real ideology is. And you can bridge this gap of ignorance and misunderstanding. And by God's grace, I was able to address a number of civic groups, faith groups. We created a coalition of Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, others, to now have a peace initiative to make sure that this country remains true to its ideals, which is freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, respecting all people, and not get caught up in what the terrorists want us to get caught up with, is this internal, division and destruction right on our soil. So that helped us a lot.
So let's fast forward a little bit further. So America fared very well. You gave a great example of President Bush saying this is not a fight against Islam, and on the whole, there were lots of incidents of hate we can talk about another time, but America fared well. But it feels like the Middle East and these countries, Al-Qaeda lasted as long as it did, but there's lots of other groups that were created as well, all of them being fairly well funded to do this work. So it appears there are still a large group of individuals, I won't call them Muslims, Imam Ahmad, that are out there with this ideology. How do you fight this ideology? There's a caliphate being formed around this ideology with ISIS and other groups out there as well. How does the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and individuals in this democracy in America fight this ideology? Because it's not just one fringe group called Al-Qaeda. It seems like there's more forming, and this ideology still exists. Who would like to start on that one?
I can give it a shot. I mean, I think that this is the fight of our times. It's not a new fight. It's been a fight for a long time that some of these extreme interpretations of Islam have crept into the faith and have eroded the faith. And we need to be clear-eyed as a Muslim community of how we deal with it. In my interactions and meeting many hundreds of leaders through our community in the past several years, we focus on what Islam truly stands for. And we say Islam doesn't need reform, Muslims need reform. And the reform can come when you believe that that Islam needed a reformer, needed a Messiah to end this concept of a perpetual religious conflict, to bring people back to humankind, to love their creation, and to usher in an Islamic renaissance. We believe we're that community. So we believe we're on the front lines of fighting this extremism at the risk of our own lives. I mean, many Ahmadis, because of the fight that we're doing against these groups, we are persecuted. 86 Ahmadis were butchered in Lahore on May 28th in 2010 by the Pakistani Taliban. And, you know, the very group that's attacking America is also attacking our community. So America's enemies in that sense were our enemies. But you do that by focusing on the fact that what was the fastest selling book after 9/11? The Holy Quran. It was flying off the shelves because people wanted to know the true teachings. This book, is it really harboring that view? And when you actually show the vast majority of Muslims in America believe that the verses of the Quran are beautiful, that this concept of jihad is beautiful, that we are fighting this fight to join us to rid this cancer within this beautiful faith tradition, then we can more quickly change the narrative. And our goal is to change the narrative, but we come from an authentic place. We don't come from a place where we in one part of the world might say horrible things about Israel and America, and then come to America and say horrible things about Al-Qaeda. We don't have that hypocrisy.
But how are you communicating with these groups?
Which groups in particular?
The ISIS, these so-called Muslims out there that are attacking
leadership.
America.
We are united by a single leader, His Holiness Mirza Masroor Ahmad, his spiritual caliph, literally and figuratively the antidote to this group. And he, in a peace symposium, is saying this group is un-Islamic and we need to clean our own house. The Muslim community needs to clean their own house to stop this scourge. So we're united by leadership.
So leadership matters. Imam Ahmad, what else is going on? What else are you working on as an imam to discourage this? There's individuals in America that are attacking, that are so-called defending Islam by attacking their country of residence.
Well, over here, we do face the issue of radicalization. You know, we have numbers that people from all over the world have joined ISIS, from Canada, from America. There's people all over the world who have left and joined ISIS. How are we fighting that? You know, I mean, up in Canada, they started the Stop the Crisis campaign. We're starting that here in the States as well. It's a series of lectures, seminars, symposia in universities to educate
Muslims
people.
For loyalty.
Muslims for loyalty and Muslims for peace.
What is Muslims for loyalty? It's a campaign that you have in America.
Muslims for Loyalty is the one that we run on Independence Day every year.
Okay, great. And it's a campaign to educate people to loyalty to their country of residence as part of their faith. Imam Hanif, we've got only a few minutes left, but take us forward from here. There's lots of work happening. Where do we go from here? Where does the sharing of Islam go from here? Where do we take this conversation?
You know, one thing we should remember in the conclusion, as I said, this was all prophesied. For a Muslim, it's not really shocking when you understand.
What do you mean this was all prophesied?
Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he indicated very clearly before he left this world that his community would go through this, you know, rapid progress and then rapid decline, and it would reach a very low ebb. And he
in that low ebb
and he defined the things you would see during that period. It would be dissensions, it would be sectarian rivalry, it would see the outbreak of wars. He mentioned even places where the wars would come from, Syria and like this. So he said at this time, you should look for your solution, as Amjad said, which will be a man raised by God to kind of galvanize all the peaceful elements in the world on one side to fight against all those radical, extreme, violent elements on the other side, including some from the Muslim world.
And is that
we see happening? The end of this battle, according to Scripture, Quran and these traditions, will be the ushering of the victory of peace, the peaceful elements, under the leadership of this Messiah who will be raised. So we should be heartened to know exactly this has happened before. This is nothing new. The radicalization of a people is nothing new. It's happened in almost all religions. The Christians were fighting crusades and then fighting each other and killing each other with bloodbaths. The Jews did the same thing. They went off, they fought against Rome and were driven out of the Holy Land. We've seen this before, and we should know what was the end of all those movements of extreme, violent, fanatical behavior. They all were wiped out eventually because this is not the spiritual way. This is against the spiritual way. And we believe the same thing is happening now, as he said, under this Khalifa. We have stood firm in the position of what is Islam against those who are claiming to be the Muslims, but approaching it in this tactic which is
But
un-Islamic.
these individuals have arms. They have all this money. You're saying that how is this Khalifa going to take them on?
Moses took on Pharaoh. What weapon did he have? Moses didn't have a single weapon in his hand, but the hand raised up in prayer. We know that history. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, what weapons did he have when the Meccans came to destroy him? He didn't have anything but the weapon of prayer. Literally, on the day he had to fight his first battle, he throws his hands up in prayer, and then storms were raged that wiped out much of the enemy. We believe it has to be a spiritual answer to this physical onslaught. Those weapons, those material, those means, those manpower, it means nothing in the sight of God, who is the creator and controller of this earth. If he's on our side and on the side of truth, he will eventually resolve this matter in his own means with the support of people who are peaceful. And this is what we're talking about.
Thank you. A lightning round, 30 seconds. Just want to hear your closing thoughts on this. Where do you see the world going? I mean, I think Imam Hanif put it very eloquently. What do you see going forward?
Well, we're almost 14, 15 years from 9/11. And what we've seen is Islam is being attacked more than ever because the behavior of some Muslims. ISIS is just another permutation of Al-Qaeda, and so we see that now more than ever we have to roll up our sleeves. And Americans know more about Islam than they did 14 years ago. That's just a fact. But yet the ignorance level has risen. That means Muslims aren't doing enough. We as Ahmadi Muslims who've been here for 90 years, going on a century, one of the oldest communities, we need to go and educate our fellow Americans that we have the equipment. And I don't mean the physical equipment, I mean the spiritual equipment, which comes from our allegiance to a leader who has an opposing ideology that's grounded in a truly peaceful view. We have the equipment to fight this fight. Let us fight it. And join us in that fight as well.
Thank you. Imam Ahmad?
Sooner or later, I do see the world turning towards the ideology of Ahmadiyyat. You said, how do we counteract the ideology of ISIS? To counteract that is by giving a better ideology. That is the ideology of Ahmadiyyat, which is the true Islam. And what Imam Azhar Hanif and what Amjad Bhai have said are true, that it's a matter of time before that occurs. With prayer, with education, it's a matter of time before the peaceful triumph of Islam will occur through Ahmadiyyat, through the means that we're using.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And we've had a fascinating conversation on 9/11. We've had a fascinating conversation about the artillery of prayer against the artillery of ISIS and all these groups. I want to thank all the panelists for being here today. And this has been another show of Open Forum in our studios in Silver Spring, Maryland with MTA International USA.